One of the greatest things about video games is the ability to put yourself into places and assume personas that simply aren't possible in the real world. Here, you could be a criminal, or a plumber, or a squishy meat patty, or whatever the hell this guy is. In Turnip Boy Commits Tax Evasion, you get to play as a turnip, which is probably a little less exotic than Mr. Spike Nipples here, but is a new experience for me nonetheless. This game is very similar to any Legend of Zelda title, complete with a focus on solving puzzles and adventuring. The hook for Turnip Boy is its overall design and its humor. It is very clear that the designers of this game have spent an obscene amount of time making sure that every single user interface motion has the corresponding sound effect and the right animation to make everything purposeful and feel like it meets that whimsy that is Turnip Boy. The jokes and overall humor of the game were clearly applied with a fire hose, but they have a somewhat more mixed result. While some of the jokes did elicit a laugh out loud moment, other jokes had me physically facepalming. The game starts you out in a town full of anthropomorphic produce. You are given as your main weapons a sword and a watering can, because apparently anthropomorphic produce thinks that shields are for suckers. The sword's purpose is pretty clear. You have to whack stuff with it. Things that want to hurt you, you need to make them dead. The watering can, though, is a little more confusing. There are various plant areas throughout the game where if you sprinkle a little bit of water on them, they will grow a miscellaneous item for you. Each one is labeled, but there are different spots that'll create bombs or blocks or portals, all types of different features in the game that can help you along your way. As the game progresses, you will get a collection of other items, but most of these items are non-actionable, meaning that you won't actually use them, you'll just turn them in for various quests. There is one very noteworthy exception to this, and that is late in the game, you will receive a portal gun that will make puzzle solving much more interesting. While this addition does increase the satisfaction of the puzzles, it comes so late in the game that you only get to use it in a couple areas before the game is over. This is unfortunate. The game could have used more complexity throughout, and the portal gun would have been a great tool to achieve this. After the initial setup in the beginning of the game, you set off on your adventure, and this game comes with a pretty solid pattern. This is a hub and spoke model of an adventure game where the town is your hub, and you'll be going to different spokes, which are the different areas in the environment around that town. For the most part, the game loop goes like this. Mayor Onion, who is a super shady character in town, wants you to find a specific item for him. This will send you to a specific environment in the world where you will find other creatures and characters that have subquests for you. By doing those subquests, you will eventually build up towards a boss. That boss usually has Mayor Onion's item. By fighting the boss and completing the boss fight, you'll be able to bring that item back to Mayor Onion, who will then send you out in search of new items in new environments. Throughout the game, you will find yourself in many new places, including forests and fields and graveyards and bunkers and gangster-filled warehouses. It has a variety of places that you'll have to go to solve the story of the game. The bosses in Turnip Boy are also a strong point. For the most part, you don't fight them with your conventional combat that you use in the rest of the game. Instead, you often will use a mixture of your weapon, and you'll be using the water can to trigger different puzzle elements to solve and combat the boss at the same time. By beating these bosses, you will be given a heart container, much like Legend of Zelda, and then you'll get your item and be sent on your way. But this does bring me to what is, I think, the Achilles heel of Turnip Boy, and that's the combat. For a game with so many good design choices between the UI and the humor and the puzzles, the combat being as bad as it is in Turnip Boy is simply a crime. The basic combat moves in Turnip Boy are swinging your sword and your dodge, which is a roll/trip/stumble, which kind of goes in line with Turnip Boy's whimsy. Just taken on their own, the swinging of the sword and the dodge roll/stumble end up executing okay. It's when those are added to the very poor movements of the enemies that the game becomes extremely boring combat-wise. Early in the game, many of the enemies are completely avoidable to start with. They don't even pursue you. Later in the game, the movement patterns of the enemies are extremely predictable, so while it may be unavoidable to actually combat them, it also just feels like a chore to do so. To add insult to injury, any room that actually becomes a challenge, there is an issue with the invulnerability frames of the character. The key issue at play here is that the invulnerability frames are shorter than the amount of time the knockback is. This means that you get no time where you are in control and invulnerable at the same time. It becomes a chain reaction, and you can't stop getting hit and are unable to move your character, so you instantly take a death with having no recourse. This is a problem that's observed mostly in bosses, and you do learn to avoid bosses altogether by learning their patterns, but it does seem to suck the fun out of a game by being forced into a almost no-hit run of the game in order to complete it. While I will admit that is a little hyperbolic, I do wish they would have spent some of the time that they clearly spent on the user interface and the sound design to polish off the combat mechanics and make the entire game feel uniform. A lot of people might also see Turnip Boy as a very short game. For me, the first run through it from start to finish was about 3 hours. However, upon completing the game, there were a number of objectives that I missed throughout, including a number of documents that you can find and rip up, and in order to see the final ultimate ending, you'll have to complete all of these things. So is Turnip Boy worthy? Well, that's gonna depend. If you're looking for a game with some superior design, an amazing soundtrack, some pretty decent puzzles, albeit a little bit easy, a lot of really good humor, but you don't mind the fact that the combat is nothing to write home about, then Turnip Boy might be the relatively short experience for you. If you enjoyed this video, then take a look at my channel and see if you enjoy any of my other videos. As always, thanks for hanging out with me, and until next time, this has been Pixel.